When I was around 15 years of age, I went through a phase of going to raves in warehouses. I only took ecstasy for the first few times, but then decided on one occasion after dropping a pill that I would like to try ketamine. I had never done it before, and the guy who gave me some was off his face. My friend later told me that he thought the guy had given me about 1/2 gram, which I snorted all at once. I think it took me about 3 snorts to get it all down. I remember my friend looking a bit shocked, but at this point he couldn't really talk. I went to sit in a stairwell with some strangers, and then I remember the first effect. It was as if where I was sitting, the stairwell, was a scene or stage, and every 10 seconds it transformed, as if each setting was evolving every single second. The floor, the walls, and the people were the same, but the materials, lighting, and colors changed. This started to happen faster and faster. I also felt as though I could communicate with the people I was with through body language only, associated with a certain movement with my arm. Certain words and phrases or patterns of sound started to repeat, as if they were somehow very significant. The world started to look like a continuously moving pattern that is always visible but unperceivable to the human eye. It was, in its own way, totally horrific. I don't remember how I got to the next place, which was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. It was a long time ago, and I think I purposefully tried to forget because it was just so terrifying on a level that is very difficult to convey. However, I have had a few flashes of it since, and occasionally certain words or patterns remind me of it. It felt like the bare emptiness of the world, out of time. There was something digital about it, as if I could look at an object from all angles at once, and everything was frozen in an abyss and digitalized. I think there were other beings there, as I remember a sort of communication, but it was a horrified communication. The general messages I was receiving were things like how this is the truth, this is it, and it's terrifying. I had no idea what I was, who I was, what it meant to be a human, or what had happened. But I knew deeply that I had done something very bad. I also felt as if everything was going to end. Nothing from real life existed anymore, and I couldn't recall anything at all. I had no body. Just the same feeling over and over, I am lost and who am I? Apparently I was speaking aloud, and crying, saying who am I? Over and over again. At this point the face of my friend appeared very small in the corner of my vision. He was saying something, and he grew bigger and bigger. The face of a woman also appeared in a similar way, reassuring me. When I eventually came back into the room and started to make slightly more sense of things, the woman told me that I had been crying, and that I had been in the K-hole for around 2 hours. I am glad she was there to reassure me, as I was absolutely terrified, in a strange warehouse, thinking that my life was over. They had found me collapsed in a small room. I was very shaken up for the next week or so. I was relieved to be back in the comforting, mundane world. The whole experience was still very fresh, and some words or sounds take me back to the same horrifying but inexplicable feelings and revelations. It is impossible to describe exactly why it was so horrible. I think it was the feeling that has always had been the truth, and that it's so tangible, and yet we live in the mundanity of daily life, so we don't see the abyss that is constantly staring us in the face. It was chaotic, meaningless, and infinite, all at the same time. Maybe the horror came from knowing that I had put myself into this state willingly. I had the feeling throughout the K-hole of seeing something I was not meant to, that was not meant for my eyes, as I was unable to deal with the truth.
The second story is coming up next.
Before telling my story, I will provide some background. This was my first and also my final experience with ketamine. I have a considerable interest in neurology, pharmacology, and the philosophical mind-body problem. Occasionally I have been known to undergo psychonautic navigation trips, using myself as the experimental subject. I had not read any experience reports about this drug before attempting it, so the observations were objective. and not conditioned by expectations. I stumbled upon some vials of injectable ketamine hydrochloride liquid by accident when cleaning out an abandoned pharmacology research laboratory. A vial of ketamine HCl was unsealed, poured into a glass dish, and evaporated slowly on the lowest heat setting with a laboratory hot plate. This yielded 1 gram of brilliant pure white crystals. This solid was divided into 8 portions of 125 milligrams each, and the doses were separated inside of pill capsules. I swallowed one of capsules containing the ketamine crystals, followed by a large glass of water, and laid down in bed in a semi-darkened room. It was during the afternoon, but the window shades of the room had been drawn to provide a more relaxing atmosphere. Sequentially, the experiences and thought patterns were the following. Stage number 1, I begin entering into a new geometric realm through the opening of what appeared to be a tunnel. It seemed as if geometric space had been collapsed, and I had entered into a place of wide parallel lines on a dark background receded towards infinity, like I was heading towards a vanishing point of convergence upon the horizon. I had heard anecdotally that some friends of my sister liked to use ketamine recreationally, and I had also heard the expression of something called the K-hole, so I thought to myself, that must be where I'm headed. I'm excited, this is going to be great. Initially a very pleasant feeling of fun and anticipation. I began laughing to myself. Stage number 2, I started to feel dissociated from my own body. I began to think that this must be what is called an out-of-body experience. I was no longer in the physical setting of the bedroom, and I was also no longer in my body. Actually, I had no specific physical existence at all. My consciousness had been transported into this alternate geometric place. There were no other people or entities present. There were no voices, sounds, or colors. It was a very monochromatic experience, similar to being in a dark tunnel. Stage number 3, terror begins to set in. I had lost sense of the passing of time, and had no way to gauge how long it had been since taking the ketamine, nor how long the K-hole experience would last. I began thinking, what if this is forever? This doesn't seem to be changing. I am afraid this must be permanent, now. I must have caused irreversible brain damage or something. My social life, family, and career are going to be over. Even if I am still able to communicate verbally with other humans somehow, there will still be no way of explaining to them how this happened. Stage number 4, complete disappearance of the human realm, eternal isolation. I began to think, well, all of those people are gone now, anyways. My family, friends, colleagues, they are all just in some other universe now. So perhaps it doesn't matter what they would think about my mistake. I was just trying something for fun and curiosity, I didn't mean to self-obliterate. Is this what is meant by a near-death experience? I have not died. But where am I? Oh, no, number. This must be hell. Somehow I have been eternally punished. I cannot live, but I cannot die. This must be what is called hell. Stage number 5, returning into physical reality, but still detached from my body. Suddenly I found myself on the floor of the bathroom of the apartment, vomiting into the toilet. So what had happened was, the oral dose of ketamine crystals had become nauseating, and somehow subconsciously my mind had ordered my body to get up out of bed, rush to the bathroom, and kneel down on the floor so as to contain the vomit. That is a complex series of actions, based on a rational decision. But all of that was completely blacked out, and I had no control over it. That aspect of the experience was terrifying. Stage number 6, a mixture of sickness and relief. I could not identify with this sickened body. The person on the bathroom floor was still not myself. It was still as if I was a detached consciousness, observing all of this from some other vantage point. but the fact that I could see the physical locality of the room meant that I was not lost for eternity in the K-hole. I had come back to life. And in reality, vomiting up the contents of my stomach probably reduced the duration of the trip, because a lot of the ketamine was spat out before entering into my bloodstream. I could have been in there for a much longer time. This was a profound experience, but not a good one. I would not choose to use ketamine again, after the terror of total isolation provoked by the dissociative effects of this drug.
The third story is next.
This all started when my friend and I were sitting on his couch making music and bumping ketamine from a 500 milligram vial. He is an experienced user, but this was my first time. We also shared a strong 8% beer. I had tried K several times and could not feel its effects, so I thought I could be immune to it, or that maybe I had a high threshold. I knew that the K-hole was supposed to be uncomfortable, but I had no idea that it could be so horrific. I was taking large bumps, eager to feel the effects of the drug and unafraid because no one had ever warned me of its potential devastating bad trips. I was curious. My face felt like a stone, numb and heavy. The first effects were quite disappointing, similar to being too drunk. I would talk a bit too loud suddenly, and my speech was a bit slurred. There was a wobble in my step. I had mild and sudden euphoria which only lasted a few minutes. I couldn't believe that people spent money on this drug. I could see that my friend was higher than me, although I had taken more than him, and he was getting ready to stop taking it. So I did one last large bump in an attempt to have a stronger impression of the drug. I had already bumped about half of the vial. Then it took off. I had to lay down because everything started to spin. All I could think was, oh no, where is this going? At first the dream was quite interesting, although it was devoid of happy or warm feelings. I felt hollow like a plastic shell. I felt like I had lost my soul, and my ability to feel connected. I dreamt that I was an android figurine laying in a strange robotic landscape, a sort of robotic maiden on an electronic beach which was mostly black empty space with electronic green outlines. This was not a visual hallucination but a waking dream. I was still aware of my friend playing music next to me. The music, which before had seemed agreeable and full of emotion, was now a collage of empty sounds devoid of beauty. It started to bother me. I tried to get up because I thought the effect would rapidly diffuse, but I was stuck. I could hear what I was saying before saying it, and I felt like I could see my body moving as a separate entity. Like I was watching myself on TV. This out-of-body feeling was coupled with an intense and intermittent nausea. I vomited a bit, hoping the nauseous feeling would go away. I felt disconnected from my body, as if I had passed on and was merely an empty shell of what I had been. A scared robotic entity. Suddenly I would feel myself come back and I would call my friend to come reassure me, but a second later I was back in the feeling like I would never feel human again. It felt hollow, empty and cold. The opposite of cozy. I felt like someone could come in and hurt and I would not care that much. My friend was trying to reassure me, but he didn't understand how traumatized I was. As I tried to keep it together, I was only going in and out of this hole. I asked him how long this would last and almost fainted when he said an hour. He suggested to take a walk outside, but this was impossible to me. It felt like I was in a place that humans were not allowed to witness, the mechanical backdrop of life, devoid of emotions and meaning. I looked at my friend and it was like looking at someone I had once loved. I could feel a strange sad tenderness. My friend seemed much older than he is, like a skeleton zombie sitting next to me, and I felt scared for the friend I had loved and who was now distorted and reduced to a half-dead creature like me. I sat there and told myself that when I came back I would never take for granted how good life felt when you are an emotional warm core, and that I never wanted to see this place again. I just wanted to come back to reality.
The fourth story will begin now.
My ketamine experience all began on a whirlwind weekend party in Las Vegas. I had never heard of ketamine before, so when one of my good friends suggested that I should try it, I decided to give it a shot. My friend gave me what I thought was a small dose of ketamine. I figured it was small enough that I would go ahead and take 2 doses. This was a big mistake. At first I just felt happy, slow, a little disorientated, and a little confused. Confused about my surroundings, people, myself, and conversations. I decided to go lay down on the bed to get comfortable. There were many others on the bed talking, doing K, and making out. I vaguely remember my boyfriend laying down next to me and someone coming up to me and giving me a back massage. Then, all of a sudden, when I was laying there, the room began to turn. Walls of darkness slid into sight. Everything turned into what looked like a coloring book. And my physical senses became completely messed up. It felt as if when other flesh was touching mine, it was robotic, jagged, and somehow melting into my own skin. I remember seeing my boyfriend's face, and nothing else. Every time he moved he left a trail of his faces behind. Sort of like what a computer does when it freezes and you move the program across the screen and it leaves multiple screens behind it. It looked just like that. I remember recognizing his face, but I didn't know who he was. I barely knew his name, and I was not sure of his relation to me. I didn't know who I was, or really what I was. I was just a mass, with my thoughts, floating in time and space. I thought I was trapped in another dimension, and at the time, I thought this was eternity. I thought I would stay in this state forever. Or that I was going through the process of death, and this was one of the stages. The room kept folding in on itself and I kept diving into the middle of it. Something like a 3-dimensional kaleidoscope. I knew I didn't like what was happening to me, because I was not in control of myself or my thoughts. Everything was melting together, colors flashed, people's faces appeared and were swept away by walls of color. I could hear words but they dragged on and on in my head, sometimes repeating themselves. It seems like an eternity that this went on. I became dizzy from all of the movement in my head, and I didn't like this feeling at all. Apparently, according to the other 7 people in the room, I quickly sat up and said stop. I want to stop. As if I were on a ride and someone could stop the machine and let me off. Then as my boyfriend tried to calm me down, I yelled out his name, looking for him, even though he was directly in front of me. At this point, everyone in the room was crowded around me, as I was making quite a scene. They got me to stand up, in hopes that walking into another room and the change of scenery would bring me out of it. And it did, but only momentarily. I would realize where I was and that I am human again and be okay for about 20 seconds, and then all of a sudden the room would fold in on itself once again, and I would dive back into it. I was in and out of the K-hole for about 30 more minutes. I can say honestly that I had a very bizarre experience. It felt as if I was something besides me, something besides human. As if I stepped into another dimension, another world. As I came to, I started seeing pixelated squares everywhere, and little bright blue geometric spider webs on everyone's faces. My good friend was talking to me, and as she was, the right side of her face slid away and I would see under her skin was a circuit board. Then I noticed this with everyone else too. My senses were still messed up at this point. So it felt like I was still very robotic, and my skin was melting into everything else. I very much enjoyed the feeling before the K-hole, but being in there was scary and uncontrollable. Please note that no one warned me, and no one even mentioned that if I do K, there is a possibility of feeling this way,